الله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. اللهم صل على
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, insha'Allah ta'ala, we continue our series on the religion of Islam and character development. So during the previous topic, we spoke on purifying our thoughts. And insha'Allah ta'ala, tonight, we move on to the next segment, purifying our actions. Insha'Allah ta'ala, to begin, I would like to invite Brother Mustafa Bismi to deliver a short presentation for the night. Please welcome him with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Can I hold them? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The topic today that I wanted to talk about that falls under the topic of purifying your actions, right? And this is a topic that I used to look into several years ago, and to my surprise, it played a huge part in Islamic belief, and I didn't realize this growing up. This is a topic that I would say wasn't well conveyed to me growing up. When I always used to think that Islam was like a religion of, rituals, a religion of practices, right? And that's how it was conveyed to me growing up, because I didn't know any different, and I just sort of witnessed the community around me, and I sort of formed my own image of religion based off that. And I think a lot of people my age have done that themselves, where they perceive the religion to be like a hollow shell of empty practices that are just passed on by generations. And therein lies sort of like the disinterest to continue on that practice. A lot of people, when they come to the West, right, there's less of an inclination to uphold those rituals of your forefathers, because when you adapt and integrate into Australian cultures, that sort of fades away. And if you don't understand why you're making these practices, it's very hard to uphold that in the long run, right? And so I wanted to understand the values of the Imams and the Prophets and how they differ from the values that I was taught, right? And I wanted to understand if I was in the correct religion. That's where the pursuit began. I grew up in a family of both Sunni and Shia Muslims, right? And I was at a crossroads where I wanted to know more, and I didn't want to just accept the belief that I was conveniently born into, right? So I looked into the religion, and this topic came up about how much the Imams put importance behind understanding your actions understanding the knowledge behind your actions, right? And that caught my interest because the way they presented it, they presented the religion like it's not something that, you can just mindlessly practice rituals. You can mindlessly pray, go to ziyarat, just absolute no understanding of what you're doing. It is not a religion that benefits those people. It's not a religion that highly honors those people. And that was the crossroad which I landed in, where I sort of saw the Islamic communities around me, and that was a value that was upheld. The ritualistic aspect of the religion was highly praised. And nobody really gave a damn if people had in-depth knowledge about what they're practicing. That wasn't valued in the community. And so when I read into what the sayings of the Imams, and the Imams put a lot of importance behind the understanding, it opened my perspective on what Islam is really preaching, and how as individuals and Muslims we have shaped the religion to be convenient for us. If you look in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, when we go to Jumu'ah prayer, it's recited. The end of Surah Jumu'ah, it talks about how the Bani Israels, the religion was sort of like, the similitude is sort of like the donkeys carrying the volumes of books on their back, not knowing what they're carrying, not knowing the weight of what they carry. They got caught in the rituals and forgot about the purpose. And people do this. This is, human beings, we regress into this state out of convenience. We regress into this state because it presents a pious image, and it upholds our name and our dignity, and so we like to continue that practice. Whereas Islam is not a religion that values that. When I saw into how the Imams define what the word Iman is, I realized that is the definition I read from the Imams is quite different to the definition I thought Iman was. Iman is sort of like, conviction of your actions through understanding and through knowledge, right? When you see a knowledgeable person act, he's actioning through his rationality. His thought process leads him to a decision. He's not actioning because he's just brought up in a certain way and he was told to do this. And he's not, he's putting the input of his intellect into his actions. And that's what Iman is. Iman is that action that is backed and rooted in understanding. And that reshaped the whole way of how I saw what Iman was defined with. And so when I looked deeper, I realized the sayings of the Holy Prophet. He talks about the difference of a knowledgeable man, a wise man in the religion, versus a mere worshipper. And the words used is mere worshipper. Someone who only has to offer his worship, right? His rituals, his practice, without the intellect, without the knowledge. The Holy Prophet says, indeed, the difference between a mere worshipper and a knowledgeable one is the difference between a horse the difference is 72 degrees in the hadith. And the Holy Prophet says each degree spans the horse's gallop for 70,000 years. And when the companion said, why is it such a huge difference? Then the Holy Prophet responded with another hadith about how the difference between the mere worshipper and the knowledgeable one in Islam is the difference between the sun and the stars as you see it. The magnitude of the sun and the stars as you see it relatively. Let's not get into science about that. But the why of the importance of knowledge in this religion is heavily valued. And being a mere worshipper is not heavily honored in the eyes of the Prophet and his religion, right? But that's not the same values Muslims hold. You see what I mean by how that is different to what Islam was preaching versus how we have changed the religion out of convenience. The religion is a religion that puts heavy importance on knowledge. The companions of Imam As-Sadiq came to him and he said, we are your closest companions, right? We're in your near circle and we're here because we want to study the wisdom that you teach. Everyone else, they're Muslim, they're Shia, they love you, they'll die for you, but they're not really interested in the wisdom that you preach, right? They care about the practice, they care about the ritual of dua, but they're not really hungry for knowledge like we are, right? And then he said, will we end up in the same place in the hereafter? Because they're asking that, they're thinking, what the hell's the point of this? We end up in the same spot, they end up why am I even doing this? Why am I so desperate to gain knowledge in Islam if we just all end up in the same spot? What's the purpose of this? The Imam As-Sadiq said, indeed Allah will not do that to you. He says, these people who do not pursue knowledge, who are not hungry for knowledge, they're not even placed in the same spot in paradise. The one who seeks knowledge, and by seeking knowledge, I want to get into what that even means. This is something I didn't know when I first wanted to learn about Islam. When I first wanted to learn about Islam, I thought knowledge was like, I don't know, have you ever watched Zakir Naik, how he talks about like, it's like he spits out like Excel outputs. You know what I mean? It's like a thesaurus or something. He just like memorizes quotes, memorizes hadith. And I thought, oh, that's knowledge. Oh, he's a very knowledgeable person, right? That's not what knowledge is in Islam. That's what I thought it was. That's what like I was led to believe growing up. The Imam says, the same thing happened to the Imam as-Sadiq. One of the companions comes to Imam as-Sadiq and he quotes a hadith of Imam Ali. And he says, well, you know, this is what Imam Ali said. Right? He wants to show off that he knows so many hadith. The Imam responds, indeed, it is a fool's ambition to utter hadith. I was like, wow, wait a minute. That's our ambition as Muslims. Is the Imam calling us fools? He says it is the ambition of a wise man to understand a hadith. Fool's ambition to utter it, wise man's ambition to understand it. And then another hadith, the Imam says, it is better for you to understand one hadith into depth than to memorize and utter 10,000 hadith. Because at 10,000 hadith, you're just skimming the surface, for God's sake. You've just memorized the saying. You don't actually have in-depth knowledge about that saying. And this is when I started to realize that what knowledge is defined as in Islam, and this goes back to purifying your actions. This knowledge is a key part of, it is a foundation of your actions. The knowledge is not, it's not skimming the surface, memorizing, Quranic sayings, memorizing, a hadith. The knowledge is the depth in that specific topic. The same thing, it's like, you think a person who studies like a PhD in physics is similar to a person who has done like an entry-level course at all sciences? You can't compare the two. The same concept of how the depth of knowledge, once you reach a grand depth of knowledge in a particular field, right? Talib, you're in finance, right? No, you're not in finance? Data science? Yeah, I'm going into data science. But you work in a bank, right? Combank? Used to, okay, that's a bad example. But once you go into that field, you understand the depth of understanding in that particular field. You're in accounting, right, Hussein? Right, I'm in finance. Once you go to the depth of accounting, once you finish your bachelor's degree, you now know the depth of a field in business. And so you don't even have to study economics. You now know how deep economics is. You now know how deep other subjects are because you've reached that depth in that field. Before, you didn't have any clue what depth was.
True, but I would say there's still a lot more depth in accounting.
In accounting, that's debatable. But the finance grads will say. But that's the importance of going into depth, right? Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen says, indeed, insight is a sign of knowledge. That hadith changed my whole life, changed my whole perspective on this religion. Insight is a sign of knowledge. Not, oh, I've skimmed the whole surface on every little chapter in the Quran, therefore I'm knowledgeable. Insight in one particular field is a sign of knowledge in that field. And we need to reshape and reimagine how we define knowledge in Islam. Because for too long, a lot of people have masqueraded positions of knowledge, whereas they just hold, mediocre little skimmets of information, trivial information. Oh, did you know Hajar al-Aswad, there's a meteorite stone there? I know that because I've read it. He's got no knowledge, just little skimming, memorized information, right? And Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about this, might go into Talib's After Dark special, but Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about how, he says, what breaks my back in this religion is the pious one who uses his piety to cover his ignorance. It's a very deep saying, right? He talks about how there's a lot of people who use the image of piety in actions and they hold a tasbih in their pocket and this, that, and they pose as like a pseudo-intellectual person, sort of like a religious Jordan Peterson. It's sort of like pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-wisdom. Oh, wow, mashallah, the clouds are blue like this and that. They pretend to be wise. They pretend to be insightful, but there's really no depth, right? This is a flaw in Islam. And it's bad because they don't offer real guidance, right? They offer the show of spirituality. And that sort of hinders on how the concept of wisdom and knowledge is tainted in the religion and how it's perceived by Muslims, right? That's what I wanted to get into. Breaking down what real knowledge is and backing your deeds on that insight, that depth of understanding in a particular field. If it was to go into charity, if it were to go into forgiveness of God, break that down and contemplate and ponder in this field. Understand what it takes to be at God's mercy. You know, contemplate before you act on it. Contemplate when you recite that dua. I want you to break it down on what God is asking you in that prayer, right? Understand, so when you recite that dua, you're saying it from the depth of your heart, like you know what it's saying, and you're saying it sincerely, right? Too many people, when they read du'as and Quran, they don't know what they're saying. They've memorized it 10,000 times, and it's sort of like in autopilot mode. And there's no genuine input from that angle. And I would like to wrap this speech up with a final quote. And it's a quote that I found really interesting about how the Imam defines the reciting of the Quran and the people who understand what they recite. It's a very interesting quote. He talks about how the people of Iman, the people of the Quran, people of understanding, the people of the Quran, and the people who possess the Quran without any understanding, and the people who possess understanding without any Quran. And he likens that to several fruits. And certain fruits have a fragrance to them, and they're also sweet. For example, like mandarin has a nice fragrance to it, and it's sweet. Some things are fragrant and bitter, right? Like lemon myrtle, smells great, you can't really eat it really well, right? And some things are sweet but don't really have a taste, like dates, for example. And the Imam talks about how the one who reads Quran but doesn't have understanding, he likens it to a sweet, the sweet fruit, the sweet smelling fruit, the aromatic fruit that doesn't have really a sweet taste. Meaning their piety and their spiritualism, it sort of welcomes you to them. But once you really know the shallow depth of knowledge, it's kind of bitter. It's not backed by anything. This is what the Imam is trying to say, right? And then you see intelligent, intellectual people who don't have any spiritualism, right? Well, there's a lot of intelligent people that you've met. And the forefront thinkers in politics, if you look into political debates and if you look into like the forefront movements, you can see that people are very intelligent, but they don't have that spiritualism, and it's sort of like the Imam describes it as they're sweet, but they're not aromatic, right? And the Imam describes the one who's like without religion, without belief, and is also not, intelligent, and it's like the fool stripped from religion, stripped from this world's intellect, and he defines it as something that is not neither sweet nor aromatic. And I'd like to end my speech on that. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakallah khair, Brother Mustafa. Very difficult to follow up after a presentation like that. So many amazing points and examples. And when you think about it, the way that our communities have often conducted their programs for the last 30, 40 years maybe, when you actually look back into the teachings of the Imam in depth, the way Brother Mustafa was describing, when you understand the gold mine, that proverbial gold mine that's there, that hasn't been dug up by our people the way it should be, you realize the injustice that's being done. And to be honest, for one, I find it sickening And this has been the terrible experience of so many young people across generations who have left the religion as a result because they haven't seen any of the value. But when they really look, when it's really examined the way it should be, that value, it's boundless, it's endless, just as the brother was saying. Now, as Brother Mustafa described, when you think about that rituals without knowledge or understanding, not realizing the true depth of those rituals. Think, for example, you're thirsty in the middle of a desert. Would you rather have a simple glass of water, or would you rather have 1,000 gold cups that are empty? What's going to benefit you more? It's the exact same thing. If you have that knowledge, understanding, all of that as part of one complete package, that's the true justice to the religion. And insha'Allah ta'ala, we can all strive towards that and revolutionizing the way we see the religion, the way we conduct our programs, insha'Allah ta'ala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina. حبيبنا وحبيب إله العالمين خاتم النبيين جد الحسن والحسين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا ولعنة الله على الأعدائهم أجمعين أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Once again, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, of course, purification of our actions. And of course, having that knowledge and understanding that Brother Mustafa described, that's the basis for striving in the right direction. It brings back to memory a narration of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam in Biharul Anwar. He says, nothing can withstand the vicissitudes of time except for aql, reason. Reason is what keeps us on the right course, on the divine path. Now, brothers and sisters, last time we examined the purification of thoughts. Now, this is crucial because thoughts form the core, the foundation of our essence, our being. When we purify our foundation, only then can we build upon it further. If we have an impure or weak foundation, it's liable to collapse very easily. So think, for example, about building on quicksand or building on a house of cards, as we mentioned last week. These are weak foundations. Anything built upon it, no matter how strong it might be, it can collapse very quickly and very easily. So again, purify ourselves at the very fundamental level and then go further. And this goes back to what Brother Mustafa was saying. When we purify our thoughts, when we purify our actions, when we're doing these rituals without any thought behind them, it's like a building that is strong on the outside, in the apparent sense, but with a weak foundation. That building collapses. So again, very important. We start at this level and then we build further, the next level, purification of our actions. Now, this is something which can often require a great level of courage and conviction, which very few people possess sometimes. So in some situations, it's very easy to make the right decision. Let's say, for example, you're out in the street or somewhere, there's a bottle of alcohol in front of you. None of us here are going to touch that bottle, no doubt in my mind. No one's going to touch that. That's a rather simple example, easy. A more difficult decision, what if instead of a bottle of alcohol, you find a wallet with $10,000 in it? What are you going to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to try and identify who this belongs to? Are we going to try and return that money back to its rightful owner? Or are we going to try and make the easy decision, claim it for ourselves? Think of what you can do with $10,000. A lot. And the reason I'm mentioning this example is because this is what took place back when I was in high school. A boy in the school, he found $10,000, but he didn't take it. He found out who the original owner was, and ultimately it was returned to that person. Now this boy, he was presented with an award ceremony, and all of the other students were present. When they mentioned the story, when they mentioned the story, that boy was ridiculed repeatedly. Everyone was saying, how stupid is that kid? He just gave away $10,000. Think about what he could have done with that money. I would have taken it, That's the mentality of the majority. And when we compare that simple example to, let's say, for instance, the most profound example, Muharram. How many people stood with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam against an army of 40,000? Just 72 or 73. Look at the disproportionality here. This is the nature of mankind. We're weak by nature, we're cowardly by nature, and very few of us have the courage and conviction to do the right thing during the most critical moment. This is something we need to develop and build upon. And inshallah ta'ala, we can do just that. Now, Brother Mustafa adequately covered the area of building our knowledge and understanding and how that can help us. Understanding our dua. Go to Dua Kumail, for example. So many places conducting Dua Kumail. As the dua is being recited, read the translation, look into the depth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're talking to Him in such a powerful way. You're giving yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're immersing Himself in His mercy, and His mercy is endless. Remember that as you do dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you remember your Creator, as you remember His qualities, what do you think about? You might think about His knowledge and power, His might and majesty, all of these things. But at the forefront of all of these, at the front and center, you should remember His mercy, His rahmah. That's the number one. And that's how we begin our recitation of the Quran. That's how we begin our dua, our munajat, our prayers. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is of the utmost importance. Because so many times we're mired in sin, we're drowned in sin throughout our lives to the point where we feel that no matter what we do, we're not worth redemption. Allah will never forgive us. When we remember His mercy and put that front and center, when we remember the verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Zumar, chapter 39, verse 53, لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا. Never despair of the mercy of Allah. Allah forgives all sins. When we remember the verse in the Quran, Inna rabbaka wasi'ul maghfirah. Verily, your Lord is infinite in His forgiveness. Allah's mercy knows no bounds. When you enter the domain of His mercy, you're entering into something that's pure and endless. So keep that at the forefront of your thoughts. And then work towards purifying yourself, no matter what position that you're in. Now, just to move on, there's something else that I want to discuss, inshallah ta'ala. When we're in any given situation where we have that choice between halal and haram, we always feel there's a voice in the back of our minds whispering to us. This is the voice of the shaitan that is often spurring us towards the haram. Whenever that happens, remember the final chapter of the Holy Quran, which was recited earlier. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas. We are seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Refuge from what? Min sharril waswasil khannas. We are seeking refuge from the shar, the evil of the secret whisperer, the evil of the shaitan. الَّذِي يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ, who whispers into the hearts of men. That voice, that shaitan, he is whispering in the back of our minds. When we The only way to defeat an enemy is to identify that enemy. When we identify that voice, when we know who's behind it, and we urge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from this voice, when we throw ourselves at the mercy of Allah and tell Him to drive the shaitan out of our minds, we take that step towards betterment, towards improvement. Because think, for example, think that each and every evil in our lives, think of it as a flame. Think of it as a flame inside of you. The flame of anger, the flame of greed, jealousy, pride, bitterness, whatever it might be. Now imagine the waswasa of the shaitan. Imagine the whispers of the shaitan as gasoline. Shaitan is trying to put gasoline on that fire to make it expand and blow beyond control to the point where we're no longer the ones in control, where he's piloting our thoughts and therefore he's piloting our actions as well. On the other hand, when we seek the protection of Allah and drive out the shaitan, we become the engineers of our own destiny, not the shaitan. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Build your knowledge, build your understanding. Have a proper sense of the depth of our dua, our munajat, the sayings of our imams, as Brother Mustafa was saying. And when it comes to those situations, when you feel that doubt, those misgivings in your mind, identify that as the shaitan, drive him out and make the right decision. Insha'Allah ta'ala, by doing that, we can work towards purifying our actions to the very best of our ability. And insha'Allah, we can all strive towards the right path, towards the right course. Insha'Allah, as Brother Mustafa mentioned, we can work towards improving our community, the way we conduct our programs. We can identify the gold mine that is there, the sayings of our imams, what they truly represent, what they embody and personify, instead of being mired in ritual without knowledge and understanding. With that, I would like to conclude and insha'Allah invite His Eminence Sheikh Hamid Waqar to deliver the main lecture for tonight. Please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Alhamdulillah, it's always honor and a privilege to be amongst you and listening to the lectures before me, always a pleasure as well. Most of the time I feel I don't even need to get up here anymore. You know? Like I don't understand what my point of the program is. But it was good. We looked at purifying actions and we touched upon knowledge. So knowing what we're doing basically. The rituals that we perform, the prayer, the fasting, Hajj, the charities that we give, all the different rituals we have, right? Having an understanding of why we're doing it, what they are, what the different movements are, why are we acting in the way that we act, very important. And even as was touched, looking at the words of the imams, looking at the words of the Quran, and going into the depths of those and really understanding them. Very important. I wanted to touch upon not only knowledge about what we're doing, but also touch upon why we're doing it. Right? And not why as in, what does prayer do for me? Why as in, what is my prayer for? Right? Why am I performing this prayer? Not in this, or like who am I performing it for, basically, right? Sincerity. And the word sincerity in Arabic, ikhlas, and sincerity in English have very similar roots, right? They both of them stem from kind of purifying something, meaning not mixing it with anything else. So something that's pure is not mixed. It's whatever that substance is, pure. Right? Now, we'll look at one tradition from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and then we'll try to go into that and understand what he's saying. Right? So we'll use that introduction of knowledge and trying to go deep into a hadith. We won't go too deep, but we'll go a little deep, inshallah. So the tradition is found in Usul al-Kafi. It's from Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Kulaini, who's the author of Usul al-Kafi, and Ali ibn Ibrahim, who's the author of Tafsir al-Qawmi, very important person in our Shia literature, and Abihi, on his father, Ibrahim ibn Hashim, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, who's another one of the big scholars of Islam, and Qasim ibn Muhammad, and Manqari, and Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, who's Imam Sadiq. Right? And there was a question about one of the verses of the Quran. And they asked the Imam to explain this verse. So the verse is, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Right? The very famous verse that we've all heard many times, that he might test you or try you to see, which one amongst you has the best actions. Right? So the companion of the Imam asked him, what does this mean? What is the best action? Right? So the Imam says, لَيْسَ يعني أَكْثَرُ عَمَلًا. Doesn't mean the person who has the most actions. Right? It's not a quantity thing. It's not the person who performs the most prayers. It's not the person who fasts the most days. That's not what it is. Right? وَلَكِنْ أَسْوَابُكُمْ عَمَلًا. But it's the righteousness of the action. Right? And then he's going to describe what that means, because I just used a different word. So he says, وَإِنَّمَا الْإِصَابَةُ خِشْيَةُ اللَّهِ وَنِيَّةُ الصَّادِقَةِ وَالْحَسَنَةِ. So the righteousness, right, of an action is fear of God and having a truthful and positive intention. So we have fear of God and correct intention. Continues. ثم قال. Continues. الإبقاء على العمل حتى يخلص أشد من العمل. So persevering, the qad, right, remaining, persevering upon an action, right, until it becomes purified, is more important, is better, right, than the action itself. And what does it mean by persevering on it? We'll get into that later. But persevering means continuing upon this action and working on the intention behind it. So some people, like when we have the discussion of intention, I remember many times, people would say, you know what, I feel I should step away from worship until I get my intention straight, and then I'll do it correctly. No. You continue your worship as you're working through your sincerity. Don't leave it. Right? And this is one sentence that insinuates that point. Continues. وَالْعَمَلُ خَالِص. So a sincere action. الَّذِي لَا تُرِيدُ أَنْ يَحْمَدَكَ عَلَيْهِ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. So a sincere action is one where you do not want to be praised by anyone other than God. That's the important point here. That's the golden sentence that when you go home, that's what you should remember. Sincere action is what? It's an action where you don't care Or you don't want, not even you don't care, you don't want to be praised by anybody, by anything except for God. Okay? Continues. وَالنِّيَّةُ أَفْضَلُ مِنَ الْعَمَلِ. So the intention is more virtuous than the action itself. The prayer and the intention behind the prayer. The intention is more important than the prayer. Right? The intention is everything. He continues, Allah, wa inna niyya hiya al-amal. And he says, well, even more. The intention is the action. So first, the intention is more virtuous than the action, but whoa. The intention is the action. That's it. That's all that matters. The prayer doesn't matter. The intention behind the prayer matters. Right? I could be praying so you guys think I'm a good person. I could be praying so you guys think that I'm a mu'min and then I'm going to use that to take advantage of you. I could be the biggest hypocrite in the world. Is my prayer worth anything? I'm praying to take advantage of you. That prayer is not worth anything. Right? That prayer is condemned. That's a bad action. And then your prayer, right next to me, looks exactly the same. It's the same outward action. The only difference between your prayer and my prayer is the intention behind it. My intention is negative, yours is pure. Your prayer is rewarded. Your prayer takes you up to heaven. Your prayer has all of the benefits behind it because of the intention. My prayer takes me down to hell because of the intention. It's the same action. No difference. Right? The intention is the action. It's powerful. That's big. Right? ثُمَّ تَلَا قَوْلَهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. Then the Imam recited another verse of the Quran. قُلْ كُلٌّ يَعْمَلُ عَلَى شَكَلَتِهِ. So say, right? Everyone acts in accordance to his character. And then he says, يَعْنِي عَلَى نِيَّتِهِ. And what that means is upon his intention. Okay, so now we have a pretty long tradition from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, talking about our actions, the rituals that we were talking, or that the brothers were talking about, the need of knowledge behind the rituals. We're talking about the rituals here. Al-amal isn't just any action, it's religious worship. So amal in this tradition here doesn't mean action, it means act of worship. Okay? So this act of worship, the rituals that we're performing, what's important is our intention. Not the action itself has benefit, obviously, but only if we have the correct intention. If we have the incorrect intention, that same action could take us to hell. The same action could be the reason behind our destruction. And if we have the right intention, it could be the reason for our, growth. The reason that we fly higher than the angels just because of our intention. All right. Now, in the tradition, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam said that, a righteous action, the word al-isaba was used, a righteous action is one that has two things: fear of God and a sincere intention. So we'll focus on the fear of God part for a couple minutes and we'll get into sincerity. So fear of God, why is that part of it? What does this have to do with a righteous action? Right? And Imam Khomeini looks at this and he gives an explanation. And what he says is, he says that fear of God leads to piety. And not false piety, real piety. Right? Taqwa. You want to be a muttaqi, a pious individual. Right? This fear of God leads to that. And when you are pious, it causes the actions to be more effective upon your soul. So piety does what? When you have fear of God, right? Piety in the religious sense of the word here means that you refrain from sin. So your soul is not dirtied by sin. Right? You seek forgiveness for the sins you've performed in the past. You kind of wash your soul off that way. And then you refrain from committing sins in the future. And the longer that you continue along that path, your soul becomes clean and pure. And the cleaner your soul is, when you perform one of these rituals, obviously mixed with the right intention, then it has a bigger effect. Right? So what Imam Khomeini is saying is that the fear of God leads to the purification of the soul, which leads to more, greater effectiveness of worship. Make sense? Okay. Now, sincerity. First, there's one verse of Quran which is interesting about piety here, right? And this relationship between the soul and the effectiveness of worship and piety. So Allah says in the Quran, Surah Ma'idah, Surah 5, verse number 27. إِنَّمَا يَتَّقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Verily, Allah accepts the worship from the pious. Of course. But the word innama is used here. He didn't say inna, he said innama. So he could have said inna, which means verily. Innama is also translated as verily. Right? So in English, we don't have any distinction there. But innama in Arabic is what we call in adat al-hasr. So it's a word that's used to denote only. Not verily, but only. Right? So here, we take that, this verse would mean Allah only accepts from the muttaqeen. Now we know that the pious are few, the muttaqeen are not in a large number of people, and we're not saying that only people who are extremely high in spirituality will their worship be accepted. No. But what we could say if we really dig into this is that true acceptance of the action, meaning it has an effect on our soul, that only happens from the muttaqeen. The effectiveness of our action, that prayer changing us. Remember the verse that prayer does what? It removes impurity. So many people pray and then 5 minutes later they're doing some kind of terrible sin. Right? But a person whose soul is pure, their prayer changes them. Every time they pray, they're changed. Think about that. Right? When we pray, as quick as possible, we're done, responsibility off our shoulder, that's it. Right? Is Allah accepting that from us? Yes. We're doing our responsibility. It's accepted. Is that affecting our soul? Debatable. Right? If our souls are purified, then that act of worship will create a revolution within us 5 times a day. Every day in the month of Ramadan. All throughout the year, the Thursday nights Dua Kamel, which was mentioned. Every time we're doing an act of worship, we would feel it. Otherwise, what are we doing? Right? So this taqwa, huge. Khishyatullah, this fear of God, huge. One huge aspect. Second aspect is sincerity. And we could work on both of them, obviously. We try to work on both of them. So with sincerity, this is the second criteria of a righteous action in the tradition of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And our worship is dependent upon our intention. Without an intention, we have nothing. Right? The more an act of worship is free from any intention other than God, the better it will be. So we know what our intention is supposed to be. I would assume we're all here, we know that much, that we're supposed to pray for God and that's it, and no one else. Right? Like that's common knowledge amongst Muslims. But are we really doing that? Is our prayer 100% free from anything other than God? That's the question. Right? And the more free it is, the less that we mix with God, the better our intention is, the more effective our prayer is. Right? There's different types of shirk. So there's shirk of the polytheist who's not Muslim. That's a whole other story, not even touching upon it. There's shirk of the Muslim. There's internal and external. We'll start with external, that's easier. External shirk is defined as riya. You know what riya is? Riya is performing acts of worship in order to be seen by other people. Right? So sometimes, yes, I'm praying for God. I come to the masjid for God. I'm praying for God. But I like it when other people see me worship. I like the status it gives me that I come to the masjid. I like people looking at me and knowing that I pray. Right? Like, even sometimes I might be praying to show people that I pray. Right? This is one aspect that a lot of people mix with the intention of God. We're not saying that the only reason we pray is so other people see us pray. That's not the only reason. Right? But that could be part of the reason. Right? Sometimes I might pray, in my house, make sure that other people see that I'm praying. They know I pray. Maybe at school, maybe at work, maybe in the masjid, wherever. And then that's external. Internal is ujb. It's praying in order to satisfy yourself. Right? They translate it as vanity. It's a little, I don't know, I don't like that word, that translation of it. But it's performing an act of worship and then becoming, not arrogant, but thinking that you're a good person because you did it. So I'm going to pray and God owes me something. I pray. I'm one of the musallin. I'm one of the people who establish prayer. Right? I'm a good person. Makes me feel good about myself. Makes me feel like a mu'min. Makes me feel like I deserve reward from God because I'm praying. Right? That's also a form of, like a minor form of shirk. It doesn't take you outside the realm of Islam, but it destroys your intention behind the prayer. Right? So if I'm praying to be seen, external, that's not a good intention. If I'm praying in order to feel good about myself as a mu'min, again, not a good intention. Or feel like I deserve reward or something like that. Right? There's also sometimes that we worship for worldly benefit. And we might use the words of the ma'sumin to support us. Right? There's plenty of traditions that if you want to increase your livelihood, perform Salatul Layl. So maybe I say I'm struggling financially. The Imam said, if I want to increase livelihood, wake up early, perform Salatul Layl. Okay, I'll do that. And I'm only doing it to make more money. I'm not doing it for God, not doing it to please God. The only reason I'm waking up is for money. Now, I'm not saying that's not accepted, because you're listening to the Imam here. I'm not saying that's not accepted, but that intention's not as pure as it could be, because you're mixing something with God here. You're not waking up purely for God. You're waking up for God and to make money. Right? Instead of working 8 hours, I'm going to wake up an hour earlier, pray for 20, 30 minutes, and then make some more money. Right? Or I'm going to give charity to remain safe. So before we go on a trip, right, we're going to give some money to the charity box in order to keep us safe in our travels. Again, there's hadith behind this. Nothing wrong with that. Right? Not saying it's not accepted, but are you mixing your safety with God? What's your intention here? Right? Is your intention giving charity only for the pleasure of God and I don't care what happens afterwards? Yes, you said it would keep me safe. You said it's good to do this before travel. I'm doing it because it's recommended to do it before travel. That's what I want to do it for, because you will be more happy. If my safety is a result of that, great. But I care about pleasing you. Is that the intention, or is the intention, I don't want anything bad to happen to me on this trip. Here's 10 cents, put it in the charity box, and there we go, I'm safe. Right? What's the intention? Okay. So let's define intention here. How did the Imam define intention? It's when you perform an action and you don't want to be praised by anyone other than God. Clear. Sheikh Bahai has a very similar way of describing it. He says, Ikhlas, sincerity means, Allah yurid amalu, right? So the person who performs the action doesn't want uwadan fid darain. So he doesn't want any return, any profit, anything at all in either the world or the hereafter. Darain. Like dar is this world. Darain is 2 dars, this world and the next. Right? So here, Sheikh Bahai is saying, not even wanting heaven or hell, that's off. I don't want anything. Nothing do I want for this worship other than God. Not in this world. I don't care if people think I'm a believer. I don't care. I'm not praying for anything in this world. I don't want any praise. And I'm not praying for anything in the hereafter either. I'm not praying for God to give me heaven or to save me from hell. I'm praying for God alone. And again, not saying that that's a bad intention. Praying for God alone is a better intention. You're getting more out of this worship. That's what we're saying, right? Now, let me read one more tradition, and then is there going to be questions? Yeah. All right. So we'll read one more tradition here, and then we'll get into the questions. This one's from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam's father, Imam Waqar alayhi salam. He says, and it's about that ibqa ala al-amal hatta yakhlusa ashada min al-amal. So persevering upon the action is better, right, than the action itself, the perseverance. Until it becomes sincere. So persevering on the action while you're working on your sincerity is important. So Imam Waqar said perseverance in an action is more difficult than the act itself. which is clear because perseverance in the action is doing it more than once. Doing the action once is easier than doing it more than once, obviously. Then he's asked, what is meant by ibqa, or perseverance here? What's meant by that? He replies, a man does some kindness to a relative or spends something for the sake of God, gives charity, right? Thereupon, the reward of a good deed performed secretly is written for him. Right? So I gave charity in secret. Yep, no one knows about it. Allah is giving me the reward of someone who gives charity secretly, which is more than someone who gives charity openly, right? So that's what that means. But perseverance here doesn't mean the continuance of the action. It means keeping the action secret. Maintaining the sincerity of this action. Not just during the moment of the action, but until death. Right? So I could pray. My prayers for God. Right? I'll pray Salatul Layl, the midnight prayer. For God. Only for God. No one else. And I finished it. Now, I don't tell anyone that I prayed. I'm keeping this intention. Tomorrow, I still didn't tell anyone. But later down the track, I might tell someone. I lost the sincerity of it. So keeping that sincerity, this perseverance upon the action, isn't only working on your action until you're able to be sincere, but it's also maintaining the sincerity of your previous actions as well. Right? So that's what the Imam is referring to here, Imam Waqar. So, a man who does some kindness to his relative or gives charity, right? Allah will give him the reward of someone who's given charity in secret. Then he mentions it to someone. Later, he mentions, I gave charity to so-and-so foundation for the people of Yemen. Oops. This reward of the person who gives charity in secret is now erased. And you get the reward of someone who gave charity in the open. You're still getting rewarded. Right? So it's okay. But you lost a lot of, sawab. You lost a lot of it, but you're still getting some. Then, slowly, now your intention changes again. And you want to be seen as someone who gives charity. A charitable person. In this society these days too, it's so good to be charitable. All of the celebrities are charitable now. Right? And I want people to see me as charitable. So I gave money to Yemen. Look at me. Portion of my allowance from my parents, or portion of my salary, portion of something I give in charity. Don't you do that? Now, this intention of an action that I previously performed with the right intention is completely destroyed. So that action is gone now. So persevering upon the sincerity of your intention is not only in the moment, but continuously as well. And that's why maybe it's more difficult sometimes, right? Imam Khomeini, so if you want to learn more about this topic, if this was interesting for you, there's a book called 40 Hadith by Imam Khomeini, and most of this is taken from that chapter. Right? One of the things he says at the end, he mentions Salatul Layl. Sometimes people are very sneaky in destroying their intentions. Right? So you perform Salatul Layl, hidden from everybody. No one knows. No one knows that you woke up and prayed. You did it quietly. Even people in your house don't know. Right? And you go back into bed before Fajr, and then you let your alarm come, and then you wake up. So not even people don't even know, like people will come and see that you were in bed No one even knows. Impossible someone knows that you prayed Salatul Layl. But then somewhere down the track, you say, it was so cold at 4 in the morning. And just that little bit, letting people know you were awake at that time. There was this breeze that came in at 4:15. Oops. Just knowing that you're awake, you want people to realize somehow, sneaky, you must have been praying. Right? It's that intention. Sometimes we unintentionally disclose, but it's not really unintentionally. But we want people to know. That desire for us to want people to know, that's that. We're not listening to Imam Sadiq here, right? We don't want to be praised at all by anyone except for God. So we're at odds in our intention. So that's, inshallah, this is what we want to work on, right? So not only knowing what we're doing, but also working on why we're doing it. For who are we doing it? Is it for ourselves to look better? Is it for some gain of some sort? Or is it purely for God? And that we should really, inshallah, take a moment and contemplate and think. Introspect within ourselves. Look at our actions. What, are we really performing these actions for God, or is there some other reason? Right? Try. Please recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Alhamdulillah, I love the breakdown of the concept of the intention, how it was broken down and delved into on such a deep level. And when you think about that, having that continuously pure intention, as the Shaykh was mentioning towards the end, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us. Let's say, for example, we want to pursue a project for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like building a mosque or establishing a community, anything like that. Sometimes we begin with a perfect intention, with a pure intention, but along the way, when we might gain some recognition or something, we might gain some fame, some wealth, some glory, that might muddle our thoughts. It might impurify our thoughts. At that stage, we have to go back to our roots. We have to go back to our beginning, remind ourselves, why are we doing this to begin with? And why am I feeling these evil thoughts? Remember, again, identify. These are the waswasa of the shaitan. These are the whispers of the shaitan. And Allah is testing us through this. If we keep moving forward and remembering our very foundation, our original intention, our original goal from the root, inshallah ta'ala, we can overcome this. Now, the other point that was mentioned, intention is the action. No doubt that's very, very powerful saying. And of course, the quantity of our righteous deeds, it pales in comparison to having that feel of our deeds. Really being in the zone, being mindful, being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just as the Shaykh mentioned, when we're conscious of Allah, when we have that taqwa, when we're amongst the muttaqi, only then can our salat be effective. Not when we're just doing it for the sake of doing it, as was mentioned tonight. So inshallah ta'ala, we can learn these key lessons and continue to persevere in our journey towards our Creator. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Hamid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, inshallah. With that, we move on to the next segment of tonight, the question and answer. Please welcome Brother Sayyid Raza Rasul to deliver the next section with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Please say salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everyone for coming to this session. Thank you Sheikh as always for enlightening us with teachings of Al-Habit. May Allah give you jazaa for this. As always, please say a loud salawat for the long and healthy life for beloved Sheikh. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, in the previous event, we talked about purifying our thoughts, which, as Sheikh said, is the basic foundation of purifying our actions. Now, as discussed by our brothers before, when we say prayers, what we do is we make the intention and then we do the action. And by action, we're showing Allah that we follow and love Him. Now, there is no doubt that when we give sajda, when we do raqu, when we give shahada, we're showing Him by action that we love Him. But there is also one thing that is missing in many prayers. Now, when we see Khawarij, those were the people who fasted all day, who read Quran, who were hafiz Quran, and who said prayers, even the prayers in the night as well. But what they lacked is a love of Ahl Bayt. And that is something which is quite important, brothers. So when you want to purify your thoughts, when you want to purify your actions, the love or following Allah is not enough. It is also the love of Ahl Bayt. Now, as Shia, when we say that we love Ali ibn Abi Talib, when we say we love the Ahl Bayt, it is not only an emotion or a feeling, it is an action that we need to show as well. There's a famous saying that love is a verb and not a noun. And that is because we have to show the love to the person that you want to. And when we show the love of Ahl Bayt, we show them that we follow what you like. We follow what you expect from us. And that is a true love of Ahl Bayt, my brothers and sisters. Now, when we come upon the love, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam says that if someone or if a Shia wants to show the world that he follow us, then he should do it by actions and not only words. That's how important your actions are. The way you treat the people, the way you treat your neighbors, your parents, your wife, your husbands. Imam Ali alayhi salam says that even giving a smile is a charity. That's how important your actions are. Now, when we're talking about actions, we need to know how to purify them or how to keep our worships consistent. And I do believe that by taking some steps, we can do that. I'll try to make the speech a bit short because we have to start the sessions after this, inshallah. So what we can do is, first thing is we need to know what are the likes and dislikes of Allah Almighty. That means that, for example, if you work in a store or you work in an office, which is not a bad thing, working is ibadah. But when you're working and you hear azan and you still keep on working, the same action of working becomes a sin. And that's the difference. So you have to put the likes and dislikes of Allah as compared to your interest. So His interest should be first as compared to your own priorities in this life. The second thing is to always have a good company. Imam Ali alayhi salam says that lucky is the one who has true and good friends. When you have good friends, they motivate you to do good deeds in this life and prevent you from doing bad sins as well. Even on Day of Judgment, it will be your friends who will also be able to help you out from the hellfire. The third thing, which is quite important, is whatever happens in your life, never lose hope in Allah and Ahl Bayt. Never finish that pure connection that you have with Allah Almighty, whatever happens. If it's a good thing, say shukr. If it's a bad thing, have sabr. And with that, I hope that every one of us become able to purify our actions and become able to become the part of Imam Mahdi's army one day, inshallah. Please say Salawat Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. With that, we'll start the Q&A sessions. The first question is, how do we Shia address the insults against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How do we Shias address the insults against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The insults. Yeah.
How should we address the insults against the Prophet? Are we referring to like some recent insults or just in general?
Just in general.
Look, it's tough, right? Because there's a number of ways that you could address it and that you could look at it. One would be to do nothing, and doing nothing would mean that there would be further attacks on the Prophet, most likely. One would be to protest and be very loud in our condemnation of any kinds of insults or attacks on the Prophet, which is good to happen. And another one would be to try to present the Prophet in a positive way and try to dispel some of the myths or misconceptions about the Prophet. And I think that would be the most productive way. Right? So a protest is good in the sense that it brings awareness to the problem. We're able to say this is something we disagree with, but the protest won't go beyond that, especially here in the West, with no physical action should be taken, no attacking the person who insulted the Prophet or anything like that would take place in the West, which is good, right? But the protest kind of makes people aware that we're upset, that Muslims are upset that such an insult took place. And that's a good thing to occur, right? But that's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to make it go away. It's not going to make the next person say, oh, the Muslims protested last time, so we're not going to do it. Right? They'll still do it. Right? So in addition to letting people know that we're upset about this, is that we should try to create an atmosphere that it wouldn't happen again. Why wouldn't that happen again? Because people know who the Prophet really was. If the people knew, people are taking misconceptions and myths about the Prophet and then using that to attack him. So if those are destroyed, then we're like, no, he didn't do that. Or he wasn't that type of person. He was this type of person. So what are you doing? Right? And people from the West have praised the Prophet over and over again. Right? I think there was a Time magazine said he was the most influential person in mankind or something like that. Right? And you have plenty of instances where non-Muslims praise the Prophet because they actually looked in to see who he was. Orientalists as well, there's all kinds of people who do that. So we could create the correct teachings or try to dispel these myths. That's better. But we have to protest too. Protest has to happen. If it doesn't happen, then people will say, yep, Muslims don't care, so
I'll take it crazy. Yeah.
Yes. So the protest is important, but it has to be controlled.
Jazakallah. The next question. Is preaching to non-Muslims still relevant in modern societies?
Speaking to them?
Preaching.
Preaching to them?
Yes.
Yes, it's definitely relevant. But what do we mean by preaching? Is it, shouting from the street that Islam is a correct religion and you should be Muslim and that's it? No. But teaching people our values and teaching people why we do what we do. So just like the two brothers before me when they spoke, not only should we know why we're doing, what we're doing and why we're doing it, but also teaching others about the virtues of Islam. And Islam means this. This is what Islam is. You know, it's not what you've heard about it. This is what it is. That's definitely something we should be doing. Obviously, there's a hierarchy of what's important, and you know, that might not be the most important thing. Like for the Sunnis, that's probably way up on the top of the list. For us, it might be a little bit below that, right? But it's still on the list. Like it's still something we should be doing.
So cool. So why Islam emphasize piety? Can we achieve piety while integrating ourselves in modern society?
Definitely. So piety is, why is it emphasized? We discussed in our lecture, but piety is definitely something that's attainable, and the way that it's defined by many of our teachers of akhlaq and spirituality is the state that you're in when you are not performing sin and when you are doing all of your wajibat. So that state is taqwa. So as long as you maintain that state, your taqwa increases and becomes stronger. And all you have to do is make that intention. So right now, right, if you make the intention to have taqwa, as long as you keep yourself from sinning in this moment, you have taqwa. And then the longer you keep it, right, meaning the longer it takes before you commit your next sin, the stronger your taqwa becomes. And then that taqwa will help protect you from sin. So it's like a kind of circular thing. The longer you keep it, the stronger you are, the harder it's to sin. So then you get even stronger and stronger, and hopefully you could maintain it for a long time.
Inshallah. Yeah. All right. The next question. Is giving knowledge to others a form of charity?
Yes, it is. Charity is not only with money, but charity could be giving a smile, could be helping someone out in a time of need, and definitely spending time and teaching someone is definitely a form of charity and one of the best forms of charity.
The last question for today is why some animals are haram, and how can you identify a halal or a haram food?
So many animals are haram to eat, right? So obviously pig is the big one, but dogs and cats and anything that's like a predator, right? Or a rodent. There's all kinds of list of animals that are haram to eat. The animals that are halal to eat are much fewer, and those are the ones that we should count. Anything other than them would be haram. How you could identify halal and haram meat is, I think, more like when you have beef, is this beef halal or haram? And you have chicken, is this chicken halal or haram? I think that's the question, not necessarily about the animal itself, but there are few animals that we could eat compared to all of the animals that exist. But how we find out if meat is halal, look, there's a few ways you could go about it. One of the easiest ways is to go to a halal butcher, and you can assume that all of the meat that they have is halal because they're Muslim and they're telling you it is, and you don't have to look further into that. So that's a very easy way. You could go to a halal restaurant, and that's the same. There are people who try to take this a step further, and they want to really look into how the animal was slaughtered, whether it was, the chicken was machine slaughtered or not, and they really, really want to dig deep into the matter to really find out. Now, we have instances in the times of our imams where we could look and see how they interacted with the society. And there were people who worried about how Sunnis were slaughtering the animals. So there's very small differences between how a Sunni and a Shia slaughters the animal, very small. Most of the time, no difference at all. But sometimes there might be a minor difference. So the Imam, when he realized that some of his followers have this issue where they're now questioning all meat, and they're questioning whether they can eat meat, the Imam responded and said that I go into the marketplace and buy and eat meat from there. Right? So the Imam is showing us that we should take the word of the Muslim. And we have principles in our fiqh called Suq al-Muslim, so the marketplace, the Muslim marketplace, right? The Muslim vendor is a hujjah for us. So if he's lying and the meat's haram, it's not a sin upon us. Imagine there's some, butcher somewhere who's slaughtering some animal and he does it wrong. He forgot to say Bismillah, or he forgot to put the animal facing the Qibla, or whatever. Right? That animal then we can't eat. But maybe this person says, wow, I just lost a lot of money, I can't do that, I can't afford it, and he puts the meat through. We would never know. Even the halal butchery who buys this animal from, this slaughterhouse would never know. No one would ever know. Right? So there's always a chance that the meat that you're eating, even if it's from some Muslim slaughterhouse that you bought from the Muslim butchery, still there's a possibility somewhere down the line it's not actually halal. But if you live in that way where you're questioning things so much like that you would never eat any meat, first of all, everything would be najis for you. You wouldn't be able to kind of function in the society pretty much. Then obviously Islam is not teaching us to act in that way. Right? So, I don't know, this is a long-winded answer here, but I feel like sometimes we become holier than the Pope, as the saying goes, where we're trying to be more religious than the Imam. We're trying to do things that the Ahlul Bayt themselves didn't do, right? And look into things and do it in the guise of Iman and faith. But remember, we're talking about intentions here, right? Mm-hmm. I bet the majority of these people who act in that way don't do it in secret. They let everyone know that, don't eat meat, right? It's something that this is their claim to fame, that they're so pious that they're not eating meat. Right? Maybe that's a problem. And I'm not attacking any individual. No one's in my mind. I'm just saying in general, right? Most people that I've seen that hold this type of view are people who are very outspoken about it. And that's questionable in and of itself.
So coming back to the halal and haram phenomenon itself, there's a quick question because we have different fatwas about this issue. Let's say in Australia, if you go to a restaurant, in which you have non-Muslim staff over there, and you ask them if the meat is halal or haram, and they say it's halal, so can you still eat that meat?
When you go to a restaurant and you ask if it's halal, right? There's different ways. Sometimes they have a halal certificate, right? And the halal certificate means that potentially, right, someone comes and looks at the way that they operate their kitchen and gives their stamp of approval that halalness is being maintained, right? And then if that certificate gives you some level of assurance that the meat is halal, then you're fine. Now, there's two issues when it comes to food. One is the meat being halal, and two is najasat. Right? So does the meat become najis? Right? The najasat for us should not be an issue at all. Right? Because we have a principle. Everything's tahir until you have yaqeen that it's become najis. So if there's a chance that it hasn't become najis, then you can eat it if it's halal. So if you're saying, there's this restaurant that serves both halal beef and chicken and pork. So maybe in the kitchen, which is behind closed doors, maybe when they're cooking it, they're using the same grill and the juices from the pork get on the beef, and therefore it's najis. Right? It's true, it's a possibility. But if you don't know that that happened, it's halal. Maybe they use a different grill. Maybe they wash the grill before they put the beef on it. Maybe the juice from the pork didn't jump 500 meters that way and touch the beef. Maybe it didn't, right? If there's a possibility, right, you don't have to worry about najasat. So most of the time, najasat is irrelevant, right? Sometimes it is. So like, let's say Subway, for instance, where they're making the sandwich in front of you, and you see them with the gloves touch the pork, and then go and touch your food and put it on. You could see it there. Like, in front of your face, you saw the najasat transfer, then that's an issue, right? But that's rare. Most restaurants don't operate like Subway does, right? And you don't see the process of them cooking your food. So if it's behind closed doors and you don't see it, then it's halal, no issue, right? Halal meaning it's tahir. You could consider it tahir. Now, the meat being halal, though, is something you have to know. So that's different than taharat. With najasat, you have to have yaqeen it's najis. But for the meat being halal, you have to have etminan. You have to be sure that the meat that you're eating is halal. So it's the onus is on it being halal, not on it being, like najasat and taharat. So it's a different. It's the opposite. So you have to be pretty sure that the meat is halal. Like etminan is like, let's say 90, 95 and higher %. Right? So how do you become that? Now, if a Muslim tells you it's halal, that's it. You don't have to look any further. You can take their word. Alhamdulillah, that's it. That, from our jurisprudence, that's enough. We don't need more, right? If it's a non-Muslim in a restaurant that is serving halal meat, this non-Muslim tells you, you ask them, and they tell you it's halal. Right? Then you ask yourself, does this give me etminan or not? Right? Maybe it does, and maybe it should even, because why would, like, if they're lying and they get caught, they could get in trouble for that. Like, if a restaurant is intentionally serving haram meat and then labeling it as halal, they could probably get into some kind of legal problem. I know in the States you could sue them easily. I'm not sure here, but probably, right? So, like, for them to lie and say that they have halal food when they don't, I would say that that's a rare case. So if someone tells me it's halal, most of the time I would accept it. I would say, yeah, like, I doubt that they're lying. Right? Like, the chance of them lying is very low in my eyes. But everyone has to look at it individually. So if this person who's telling you it's halal, you don't believe them for whatever reason, and they're not Muslim, then no, you can't take that. But if it does give you that level of assurance, you can. So you have to look in, I guess, to your heart and see what it does for you. But that's for the meat being halal. And here in Australia, pretty lucky, most of the meat is halal anyways. Right? The majority of chicken, far majority of chicken, and a whole lot of the beef and sheep and whatever is slaughtered because it's sent to Muslim countries. So we know that a large portion of this meat is halal. Even if they don't even know it. Like, the person selling this meat might not even know it's halal, but we might know that, it's from that vendor. We know it's halal. You don't even know it's halal, but it's halal. Right? And then najasat, again, just reiterating, najasat's the issue. Remember, you have to see it become najis. Otherwise, you consider it tahir.
Jazakallah, Sheikh. If any brother has any questions, just raise your hand. Questions? Okay. Thank you so much, Sheikh, for answering our questions and clarifying our confusions. Before I end this session, brothers, please remember that we are the ambassadors in Australia, the ambassadors of Ahl Bayt. Our actions should let them attract towards Shia Islam and not the opposite, inshallah. With that, I would like to call Brother Hussein to wrap up the session. Please say salawat al Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, for the Q&A. As always, it brought back to mind the lecture at Nabi Akram, where we explored the topic of waswasa in great detail. Indeed, when we look back into the specifics and we delve too deep, sometimes we lose ourselves and keep questioning every single thing. You know, this is why it's important to have a fundamental understanding of issues of fiqh, jurisprudence, looking back to the questions and answers of our marja, understanding the difference between what is najis and what is not. When you have that fundamental understanding, you don't fall into these traps where you're constantly having doubts over everything. So insha'Allah ta'ala, we can do that. We can conduct our research, look into the books of fiqh, the rulings of our maraja, insha'Allah. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, as always. Insha'Allah ta'ala, with that, we'll wrap up tonight. To finish the program, I'd like to invite Brother Sayyid Raza Rasul again to perform ziyarat. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.